Welcome to the Legal Learning Podcast. I'm Jolene, your host. With the Legal Learning Center, I help pre-law students and law students with their legal journey. Today's guest is an attorney who will walk us through all things credit. Can you apply to law school if you just filed bankruptcy? Can you get loans? How can you improve your credit? After our chat, I'll give you my top takeaways. But first, a quick word from our sponsor. Financially Free Aspiring Attorneys is a course with over $300,000 in money-saving tips. If you want to go to law school but don't want to pay for it, visit legallearningscenter.com/financially-free for more information on how you can avoid law loans.
Hi, I'm Dave Johnson. I practiced law for about 15 years before retiring and went into real estate. I'm a real estate broker in the state of Pennsylvania. I have a website called CreditMonkey.pro, not com, .pro. Don't go to com because they stole a lot of my work, and I had to do a cease and desist letter to them to get them from republishing my stuff. But it's CreditMonkey.pro, in which I talk mainly about credit, debt, credit scores, financing, and a little bit of real estate with it. It's I've been building it. It's just that I'm so busy I don't write as much as I should, but I have about 10 articles in edit. So one of these days it'll snow in Pennsylvania or it'll rain. I'll sit down, I'll get them all edited and improve it. My website is not your typical sign up for credit cards here. It's much more unique in what you find. You'll find very little of the information I put anywhere else.
It's definitely true. I've definitely checked it out, and it's really good tips that are not what I've seen elsewhere. So I definitely
also learn to read like a lawyer, because some of the early stuff really does sound like a lawyer and not a credit monkey.
Well, tell me first, why is credit important?
Well, credit affects everything in your life. Credit affects what cell phone plan you can get, whether you have to prepay a cell phone plan, whether you have to put a deposit down to get your next iPhone or your next Samsung. It affects your car insurance. It affects everything you do, because everybody now online, you press a button, there's your credit score, and they don't even have to pull a hard credit score. They can pull a soft credit score, and you'll never know that they've pulled it.
And where do we get a copy of our own credit score?
Oh, well, there's some jokes about that, but I'll tell you the first is if you go for a loan and the loan officer leaves the room, take the credit report and stick it in your pocket, because it's better than anything you can get for free.
Okay.
Then there are websites available that use various other credit score things like Credit Karma, and you can get a credit score, you can get a credit report from them. It's not easy to read, but you can. And then there's a website sponsored by the government called annualcreditreport.com, and you can get a credit report from there once a year. Does not have a score on it, though. Does not have a number. It just tells you everything that's there. Of course, while you're there, you can pay the money and get it, and get a credit report. You can call the three major credit reporting agencies, and they'll gladly sell you one and email you a credit score. The other way to get a credit report easily is if you get declined for credit. If you're declined for credit, you'll get a letter in the mail saying why you were declined, and they'll typically tell you that a credit bureau said no, that your credit score was too low and it didn't fit in there. And you'll either name a credit bureau. So if they name Equifax, you can actually write a letter to Equifax, get on their website. There's a way to do it on their website, and you can request it. They have to send you a free credit report. Now, they don't necessarily have to give you one that has a credit score on it, but they have to send you a free credit report so you can see what's on it. If they don't specify a particular credit reporting agency, then you can go to all three and request one from all three, and they'll send it because you just say, I don't know who it was. They didn't specify which one. It just says my credit report. So you can get the credit report and look at them. What I do when I'm working with somebody, which I do less and less of at this point, is I have a friend who's a mortgage officer, and I slip her the $35 that it costs her to print a credit report, and she prints one for me and slips it to me because I tell her, oh, it's a possible mortgage person that I have to work with and get their credit score up. But they're the easiest ones to read. They're called tri-pools, and they have all the three major credit reporting agencies, and they're all lined up, and it's very easy to read.
And is there a difference? Is there a difference between the three?
There's always is, because not every creditor reports to all three agencies, and all three agencies have a slight variation on the FICO scoring system. So one might have add 1, -2, and the formula itself is a trade secret. The other thing, it really depends on what you're doing, because there's one FICO scoring system for a credit card, another FICO system scoring for a car, a different FICO scoring system for a house. So it really depends. I think there's, last time I looked, there was 38 different possible between the three of them credit numbers you can get, all with the same score, really depending on what you're looking for. And there's also currently there's different versions of the FICO system scoring model available. So you add all that. So it becomes
exhausting.
It becomes a bit of an art as much as a science.
Now, is there a way, if we're having, bad things on our credit reports or bad credit scores, is there an easy way for us as individuals to fix that?
Yes and no. It's all paperwork. Whether you do it online, I guess I'm old school. I don't do it online. I fall back to the lawyer's mode where I write a letter. That way I have documentation for everything. Once you do an online complaint or dispute, you click send, and unless you did a screen print, it's gone. So you don't exactly have everything. So I do it in a letter. You can dispute almost anything on a credit score, on a credit report. That may or may not be the best thing to do. For instance, if you hire a credit repair agency, even one who's well-known law firm that does it, advertises nationwide, what they do is they just take everything bad on your credit report and send a dispute letter to the credit bureau. So 30 days later, your credit score has jumped up to here, and you go, great. And then you watch it slowly come down, slowly come down, slowly come down. Their hope is that the person or debtor, the creditor doesn't respond timely. And if they don't respond within 30 days of the dispute, they can, the law says that the credit reporting agencies must remove it from your credit score. However, I'm finding now that everything's computerized. 30 days is nothing, because they have most large credit issuers have a room full of people just clicking buttons and generating responses. And it doesn't have to be a great response. It's just, yeah, he owes us money. And that's good enough to spoil the dispute. So there's other ways. Usually debt validation, lots of different ways to play. Let's make a deal. And then there's just some things that there's no legal way around it, but there are people who have unscrupulous ways of removing things.
Wow. So now, how do you know when it's time to hire someone to help you fix your score?
Okay, the bankruptcy attorney's coming out of me. If somebody comes into me and somebody's suing them for a credit card debt, my first question is, how many more of these are you going to get? And well, I will probably get 2 or 3 right away. I'm usually telling them, let's file bankruptcy. It's faster and quicker. If somebody's coming to me with a whole lot of old debt, bad debt that is not high dollar amounts, then let's just work on your credit score. But if you're on the edge of being sued by 3 or 4 or 5 companies, it's going to be cheaper and faster to recover from it, because it's easier to start from nothing and still have the bankruptcy on your credit, because after 2 years, it doesn't mean anything to anybody, even though it's on your credit. Where if you get into one of the credit management companies, it's going to take you 5 years to clean up your credit score, and then all that stuff that didn't come off in the first year is still going to be on your credit report for another 7 years. So sometimes the bankruptcy attorney says, this is faster and cheaper, let's just do this. But it really depends. If you have to buy a car next week, maybe we have to do some other things. If you're going to buy a house 6 months from now, we better not. But if you have 2 years or 3 years where you're not going to have to use great amounts of credit, and you're not going to get sued, then look at credit repair.
Now, how does that impact the bankruptcy and the credit repair issues applying to law school?
You're not going to learn anything about credit in law school. You can be a bankruptcy attorney and you know nothing about credit. And really all you want them to do is give you their check for whatever the going rate is for bankruptcy, and you're going to file bankruptcy, and they're going to go, what matters is why somebody's coming to you for help with credit, coming to you for help with bankruptcy. Again, if they need to buy a house within the next year, I'm probably going to steer them away, if at all possible, from a bankruptcy, because they're not going to be able to buy a house. It's going to be typically 2 years, and if they own an FHA mortgage, as long as they refinance FH, or the house they buy is FHA, after 2 years, you can get an FHA mortgage, unless you already have a house that has an FHA mortgage and you surrender that in bankruptcy. Then it's 2 years from the time the sheriff's deed, or if you have a state where it's a deed in trust, is released. So usually you're 2 to 3 years to buy a house after bankruptcy, if you do everything right to restore your credit. Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
What happens with a bankruptcy, everything's gone. Everything except student loan and child support is gone, and taxes. And if you're doing a Chapter 13, taxes can get thrown in there. It's all gone. So you're going to have a fresh credit report. So all you have to do is rebuild your credit, which is usually far easier and far faster than what it is to remove all the junk. But if you need, go ahead.
Is there certain types of student loans that can be waived in the bankruptcy?
There was a case last fall in New York, and I forget the bankruptcy test, because usually when people would come into my office and you look at bankruptcy and you go, gee, your biggest problem is student loans, and they're not going to go away. To make them go away, I used to tell people, the only way to make these things go away is to live in a cardboard box under the railroad tracks, because otherwise they're not going to go away. A judge in federal circuit court in New York last year said that we had been interpreting the test in the bankruptcy code wrong. And the way he interpreted the test was, and I'm talking, hopefully these students will understand what we're talking about, because you're either in law school or getting, so you will know what it means. Is basically the way he interpreted the test is student loans can be discharged if you have no chance of ever paying them. If there's no reasonable chance of ever paying them, it's discharged, because the purpose of bankruptcy is a fresh start.
Right.
And if you can't get rid of student loans, a large portion of America will not have a fresh start. So now it's going through, waiting for the appeals court to hear whether or not they're going to let the new interpretation of the test be accepted the way the judge in New York had it. If that happens, I'm coming out of retirement and opening up just a law practice, just doing bankruptcies for people in student loan debt, because it's like 25% of the people are in default of their student loans. It's incredible. It's the next big, to me, it's the next big financial thing that's going to happen in America.
It really is very scary. Even those who aren't in default, there are so many who are struggling to make those payments and aren't moving forward, I think, in life because they are making those payments. So,
well, you want to give a boom to the economy, let people discharge student loans in bankruptcy. The economy will boom because there'll be now so much more money being spent. You won't have to keep interest rates at almost zero to keep the economy moving.
now, if we have a student who is returning to law school later in life, so they've already worked a bit, and yeah, I took 2 years off, not much, but a little bit. But if they, if things go wrong during that time off and they file for bankruptcy and decide, okay, I want to go to law school, is that going to impact their application or their ability to get loans for law school?
I would disclose it, always disclose it. If the bankruptcy was 3 years old or older, if it's a Chapter 7, it's probably not going to hurt. Less than 2 years, it may or may not hurt, because you have two types of loans in law school. You have the guaranteed loans from the government. They don't care what your credit looks like. You can have a credit score of 3, and the lowest you can have is 400, but you can have a credit score of 3, and you can have everything, a judgment, 14 judgments, 3 on your credit report, and you're going to be able to get that guaranteed student loan. If you can't survive on that guaranteed student loan, then there's private loans. Those it will matter. Those it will matter. Sally Mae has some programs. If you've had bad credit in the past, but you're currently up to date on everything, they had some programs and have some programs that you can work with. But beyond that, the private loans won't happen. So your student loans, typically guaranteed ones, will pay tuition, or most of tuition, and books. And books are more than tuition, I think, half the time. So if you have money saved, or you have a spouse who is willing to work, and you can live on that money, or your savings, and then you're okay. But if you have to borrow money to live on, you're going to be in a real problem with borrowing private money, and that applies to the bar loan as well.
Now, how do the credit agencies look at these student loans, the private and the federal and all that stuff? How does that affect your score?
Depends on what you're looking at. Credit cards, who cares? Is a credit score good? They're just looking at a number. For the most part, car loans are looking at a number, and they're just looking what the score is. The issue comes down to housing is a whole nother story, especially a mortgage. There's a front end and back end equations on a mortgage. Front end basically looks at how much you're able to spend on a mortgage. The back end looks at what the total cost of your mortgage is versus versus what you have. So if you have a mortgage payment if you have a student loan payment of $400 a month, when you take your income, they take that $400 a month 100% off of what you're able to spend on a mortgage. So $400 in today's market is $50,000 for a house. So if you're a young law student or lawyer, and you make $75 a year, which might be a lot in some areas, and you take your gross income, you subtract all your recurring monthly bills, the minimum payment, and then you also subtract the payment for your student loans, you may only have 30,000 left, and you multiply that by 0.45, and that's what your principal, interest, tax, and insurance must be. You're going to be living in a mobile home in a cheap trailer park. It just doesn't leave a lot of money. Now you're going to say, well, I'm going to have it, and I'm going to put these things on hold where I don't have to make any payments. Well, there's then what the mortgage companies do is they take your entire amount of your loan, and depending on the company, they either use 1 or 2% of the total amount, and they consider that as what your monthly payment is. So you're still stuck with that $400 or $350, $500 a month loan. So it's really, really, it just marks everything up. When we bought our first house after law school, we were fortunate that my wife made really, really, really good money, and we put the house in her name. I didn't even put mine on because as soon as we put my student loans on there, it made what we were eligible to buy for a house less than $100,000, and it was interest rates were a little bit higher back then, but it just really hammers you. There's just no way around it, and if they're in default, well, forget getting any government-backed loans, because you're not going to be eligible for FHA, USDA, or any of the other government loans because you're behind. Now, you can have really good credit and have a loan in default and have it 7 or 8 years old and it's in default. If the bank holds as a portfolio loan, which basically means they're keeping it in-house, they're not reselling it to somewhere, you can probably get around it. But if there's any chance that the bank is going to sell your loan, they're not going to get around it, because there's a national database that has every single student loan that's in default. Some of them go back 20 years, and they know that's in default. And if you're looking for an FHA or a USDA loan, you're not going to be able to get a government-backed loan, or a VA loan for that matter.
I've seen this time and again with just myself, my friends, where you're practicing law for about 5 years or so, and suddenly your tax person says, okay, you need to buy a house. You make too much money for tax purposes. You need to buy a house. But we're all in the same boat of, well, I'm paying $1,500, $2,000, I don't know, whatever. If you have a spouse with also student loans, you've got all this money going to the student loans. You barely have enough to even begin saving for a down payment, much less buy now. And then if you live in a place like LA, New York, San Francisco, it just compounds, because one, the down payments are basically the same size as a house in the Midwest, and then and then you still need to buy the house, and so it just is this huge ball that is a mess, and it's all wrapped up together where I make too much money, so to get a tax benefit I'm supposed to buy, but I have all these student loans that I'm paying a mortgage already to, so I can't afford a mortgage. Do you have any recommendations, either whether it's upon graduation or?
I will give you one thing to think about. I won't make a recommendation without it. You can refinance those student loans a whole lot cheaper now. I mean, because they're still giving you student loans at 6%. Government's making money off your student loan.
Yeah.
And you can refinance them if you have good credit at 3.5%, 4%. Here's the problem, and it may not mean anything to somebody 28 graduating, but for somebody like me who graduated in his late 40s, a government guaranteed student loan is not part of your estate. So as long as I left my student loans as a government-backed student loans, I could die and my wife would not ever have to pay them. My estate would not have to pay them. They just go away and the government guarantees them. If I refinance those student loans and get a lower interest rate and drop my monthly payments, which makes me eligible, and maybe makes them more affordable to pay ahead on, the new loan becomes part of my estate. So if I'm at the courthouse and I'm reading the judge's order and I step off the curb and a bus hits me, now my spouse, my estate must pay that, or at least until there's no more money in the estate. So it becomes a whole nother issue. And again, you can't get rid of them through bankruptcy. My question, I haven't ever been able to get an answer, and I was tempted to do this when I first left, was to refinance them, wait 6 months, and then file bankruptcy and see if I can make them go away. But there is a certain designate, but you can't get another type of student loan to refinance a student loan, because they're listed as private student loans and they don't go away under bankruptcy. They're not discharged. So I thought about taking an investment property, taking a mortgage out on an investment property, paying them, and then just walk away and file bankruptcy. And okay, so I'm going to lose the house, but I'm also going to lose all the debt. One of the reasons why it took us so long to get out of the last recession was up until 2006, when the bankruptcy code changed. You could file bankruptcy and the student loans would go away and you would really start fresh. The people who were making the big money, the high income professionals, are paying for 20 or 25 years on these loans. They lost their house, they lost their job, but they still had to continue to pay student loans.
Yeah.
So you're sort of stuck. What do you do? And other than trying to refinance it without having it listed as a student loan is the only way I could see out. But I keep, I think I still have about 15,000, and I graduated in 2005. The reason why I never refinanced is I didn't want to be part of my estate.
Now, are there things that students can do before they go to law school to try to, one, keep their credit good, but two, avoid some of this?
Just say no to credit cards. Yeah, 1 or 2 is okay, as long as you don't abuse them. Just remember, you're promising to pay it back when you spend it, and going out for pizza and coffee. And I hate to sound like I'm, on a Facebook meme for it, but yeah, it's overspending at a young age is one of the biggest issues for bankruptcy, biggest issue for debt. Get older, you don't tend to do that as much. You have other issues. So every time when you're in school and there is a new law to stop that, it's about 6 years old, called the CARD Act, in which you have to have parents' approval, or their banks are not allowed to just stand out and give out applications on your orientation day in undergrad. So you do that, you pull a credit report and you look at it regularly, get one every year. I'm not a huge version of Credit Karma, because they don't use any of the standard, or they don't use all the standard FICO scoring. They use one, and then you use Vantage Score for the other score, which is a whole different system. But at least it gives you a scale to look and see where you're at. But if you look every year and try to keep it straight, it's going to be hard if you've spent 4 years in undergrad and now you're spending 3 years in grad school. It's going to be hard. But you look at it, and if I'm looking at it and say, I can't pay my credit card bill and my electric bill, and as long as my electric bill is up to date, I would pay my credit card bill, and then keep money to pay it the next month, because it's nowhere near what your electric bill is, and then pay your electric bill, because unless you go into default, the electric company is not reporting to the credit bureaus that you're a month behind on your electric bill. The same thing, the cell phone companies do, so you can't do it with cell phone. Same thing with water, sewer type things. you're a voter. They don't want, the municipalities and the authorities don't want you voting against them. So they give you far more flexibility. If you want a higher score, keep your credit cards, your installment loans, and play if you have to play with a utility. Just don't do it too many months in a row, or that backfires as well. It's kind of hard to study under candlelight. You can always go back and negotiate with credit card companies. They don't have to negotiate with you, but because they have a contract, do that before you go to law school, or do that in your first year, because you say, well, gee, I'm making my payments, but if you're making a payment arrangement other than what your initial contract agreement was, it's reported that way on the credit report, and that's scored against you. So if your minimum payment would be $25, and you're making a minimum payment of 10, even though your contract agreement says 25 is your minimum payment, and the bank decides, well, if I'm going to get something out of this, I'll take 10 for now. They report it as an agreed upon amount, but not paid in full. Or if you negotiate your bill down and you owe $1,000, and you go back to them and say, look, I'm struggling here financially. I can only give you $700, but I can give it to you all at once. Will you make it go away? There's some pay and delete that you can do in it, but if you don't do pay and delete, not everybody does pay and delete, it'll show up and it'll drag your credit score down for up to 2 years. And if you miss one payment, one credit card payment, and you go beyond 30 days beyond when it was due, you can drop your score 20, 40 points.
Okay.
Even if you make it later.
And I know that a lot of students are forced to take out bar loans, which I didn't even know about until it was time to take it out, which is, your student loans only last you till May, and all of a sudden you need money to last you through August. Yes. Because you're not working, you're just studying, you have to pay for the bar and the bar exam course. And so as far as I understand, that's just a private loan, right? There's no federal loan for that?
Correct. Now, Sallie Mae has a deal where they don't care how bad your credit is, as long as everything is up to date.
Okay.
But that can be hard.
Yeah.
That can be hard. But if you have everything up to date, then you just go back and you start talking to creditors, and banks, credit cards can often reset your loan as if it was just restarting today, and they can reset the loan. But I think by law, they're only allowed to do that once every 4 years. Okay. So if you've already done it, and most banks don't want to do that, but go back and ask. Always ask. If you have a recent late payment, call them and say, hey, look, I didn't realize it was a late payment. I had it in the envelope to pay it, and it slipped between the seat. A modern version of my dog ate the payment.
The check's in the mail.
Yeah. But you're going to need to show payment or show the statement that says you're up to date on anything that shows up late on the credit bureau. So, I mean, but if you start in your 2L year, you'll know which ones you have to work on and which ones you don't. And you don't want anything in collections either on that, because they won't do it if you're in collections.
Okay.
So well, that to us, we were living on. I had a partial scholarship. We borrowed what we had to for tuition and books, and we lived on what my wife made, and we lived in the area that we live in wasn't an overly high paid area, and we survived. But we had some things that I had to go in, and that's really got me interested in credit, was figuring out where we go from there.
Do you recommend that students, after they graduate, sit down with some type of, even though they're thousands in debt, with a financial planner or a credit counselor or something like that?
There are free ones. There are free ones. You have to be aware that some of the free ones are paid by the credit card companies. So I don't care what they tell me. about what they tell me about, oh yeah, they're free counselors and here to help you. If they're paid by the enemy, they're still the enemy. So you're better off finding one in the community by some community organization that is not funded by a bank or a credit card company or something. My personal opinion, and I guess I did debt practice and all for so many years. Most of them really don't know what they're talking about. So, they're more set up to help you set up a budget and figure out, start now and in 3 years from now will help you. The other thing I would tell people is I am not a huge fan of debt managers. They call themselves a lot of different things, but I'm not a big fan of debt managers. I had a gentleman come in, an older gentleman, who was using a debt manager in Florida. Florida is a state that allows you to have operate a debt management business. And when I looked at it, he was paying more to the debt manager than what the amount of the debt actually was, of two debts actually was. And in this particular case, the fees were paid up front. So the only reason he found me is he got sued by something he thought the debt manager was paying, but the debt manager was taking his fees up front. So basically, it was, that's unethical.
Yeah.
And so I threatened to report the behavior to the Supreme Court in Florida, and we got a check back for all the money that he paid, which was enough to file bankruptcy.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It's just really scary. You just don't know exactly what you're dealing with, and when you're in such a dire situation,
they take advantage of. If you there is a federal statute. It's one page of what by federal law a credit repair person or company can charge. And it's not dollar amount, this is what they can charge for. So whatever dollar amount they assign, and then the court extended it to one other thing. But basically they can charge for a letter they send out, for a phone call that they do, or when something's removed from your credit report. Okay. The courts have extended it, at least in my state, where they can also charge a monthly maintenance fee. So, $25 a month or $50 a month plus this, and this. There's a lot of things you can do to improve your credit that they never tell you about because they can't charge you for it. So why would they bother telling you about it?
Well, okay, that was all the questions I had. I think that really gave the students a really good idea of, one, what they're up against at the tail end of law school, really what they need to watch out for, what they should do before they start law school to just get into good habits. Do you have any last pieces of wisdom you want to make sure they know about?
if you're in all kinds of debt and you don't have a whole lot of real assets, I'm not talking about clothes, records, CDs, whatever, but real assets like real estate. And after you're accepted in law school and you're worried about paying it, then as long as you don't need private money, then is a good time after you're accepted to file bankruptcy. You have 3 years for all that debt to go away that you accumulated on credit cards and all that were given to you while you were in undergrad. If you're looking for private loans, don't do it, because you will probably not get private loans until your last year. Other than that, that's, you just got to build good habits, because there are a lot of attorneys who file bankruptcy. I've done it for a lot of attorneys.
Yeah. I think it just gets so overwhelming. It goes quickly, and you have to be very careful. So yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much, David. If they want to reach out to you, if they have any questions or follow up, or want to maybe see if you can help them in any way, where can they reach you?
I'm building a web page. It's or a website. It's CreditMonkey.pro. not com, .pro as in professional. You can reach me at info@CreditMonkey.pro.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Before we get into my top takeaways, a quick word from our sponsor, Juno. If you need to take out student loans, check in with Juno first. Juno can often save law students 1 to 2% less in interest rates on their loans below federal loans, and with no cost to the student and usually cash back as well. Visit joinjuno.com/P like podcast/legal learning center to sign up. Okay, so my first takeaway is be proactive. Review your credit score and reports regularly. Number 2, be careful around debt managers and financial advisors who are trying to do things like sell you credit cards. Number 3, if you are having financial issues before law school, the optimal time to file bankruptcy is after you're already in school, but you won't qualify for private loans. 4, generally student loans are not discharged in bankruptcy, but there are hints that this is changing. Now, all tips, links, and so forth will be in the show notes. And that's it for this episode. Be sure to tune in next week when we talk to Alex. Alex returned to law school after about 10 years off. Find out what he did to prepare himself for success and ensure that returning was the right decision for him. And if you learned anything today, please like, share, comment, review, subscribe so that this show is more visible and can help others who need it. Thank you.